Have you ever heard of the Battle of Tours? Probably not. But without this battle, Europe may have ended up speaking Arabic instead of French. This battle is often called the Second Battle of Caliphate. Why? Well, because it's believed that if Charles Martel hadn't won here, the Umayyad Caliphate would have kept pushing west and potentially conquered all of Europe. So let's talk about the battle that saved the West. Welcome to my channel, where we bring you the craziest and most important stories from human history. A lot of people think that the Roman Empire just collapsed, and then the Middle Ages began. And while the Western Roman Empire did fall in for 76 years, there was still plenty of Romans living in what we today call Europe. In fact, during this time period, Germanic tribes were more often than not allies or clients of the imperial government, in order to fend off the real threat, which came from across the sea in North Africa. An Arab coalition led by the Umayyad Caliphate was slowly conquering their way across the Mediterranean. By the year 711, they had taken control of most of the Iberian Peninsula, and by 714, they had taken North Africa and southern France as well. They were even close to taking all of Gaul, which is what the ancient Gauls would have called France, because, technically, Tours is in what we today call France, but at this time it was a part of the Frankish kingdom of New. The Franks weren't a particularly impressive people, but their king, a man named Clovis, had converted them all to Christianity in the late 5th century, and so now, with the help of the Pope, Charles, who was known as Charles Martel, he was able to raise an army to stop the Muslims. He didn't do it alone though. He got help from some allies, including the aforementioned Pope Gregory III. Together, they assembled an army of around 40,000 men. It doesn't sound like a big army today, but in the early medieval period, that was massive. By comparison, the Umayyad army was much smaller. Modern historians estimate that there were between 28,000 and 30,000 Muslim soldiers. The Muslim advance into Europe was led by two brothers named al-Rahman al-Ghani and his brother Musa bin Nu. When the Muslim armies advanced into Gaul, it seems that they really didn't face any organized resistance until they got to Tours. When Charles Martel heard that the Muslims had arrived, he immediately set out to meet them. The armies first met near the river Seine. The Muslims easily defeated the small Frankish force there and sent them running. Charles, however, wasn't fazed. He pulled back his troops and waited for the Muslims to come to him, and this proved to be a wise decision. See, the thing about commanding an army in the medieval period was that if you wanted your men to have enough food, you had to march with them. As a result, armies moved pretty slowly. The Muslim army camped out near Tours, while Charles and his men prepared for battle. The next day, both armies got up early and prepared for the upcoming battle. There are actually contemporary accounts of the battle that were written down a few years after the fighting had taken place. So while we don't know every detail, we do have a pretty good idea of how the battle went. According to the sources, Charles set up his men in 3 different divisions. On the far right wing, he placed his elite guard, the men who would become known as the Anjou and were composed of family members and nobles from among his allies. Then in the middle, he placed his infantry and cavalry reserves. And, on the left wing, he placed mounted archers, which were very effective at the time since they could shoot arrows without having to get off their horses. Meanwhile, the Muslims also divided their forces into 3 sections, although no sources tell us exactly how they set up their camp. Given that we know Muslim armies used elephants in battle, it is possible that they put these war machines on the flanks to prevent any cavalry charges from getting too close. When the armies met the next morning, the battle started off poorly for the Christians. Al-Rahman al-Ghani charged straight at Charles' elite guard on the right wing and completely routed them. Seeing their comrades flee, the Christian infantry panicked and fell into disarray. Charles, though, managed to rally them and turn them toward the enemy. And then something interesting happened. According to the sources, Charles sent a large group of cavalrymen to take out the Muslim artillery. Why? Well, because guns and cannons hadn't been invented yet. Catapults and ballistae were the weapons of war, and if the Christians could get rid of the Muslim siege engines, it would greatly weaken their ability to do damage. Thankfully for Charles, his men followed his orders and destroyed several catapults and towers the Muslims had brought with them. With the Muslims' ability to hurl projectiles hindered, the tide of the battle turned and the Christians started making gains on the battlefield. The mounted archers on the left wing were especially deadly as they picked off the Muslim generals. Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, Charles Martel himself had gotten off his horse and was leading the infantry in a desperate charge against Abidi al-Rahman al-Ghani. The 2 leaders duelled with swords, but Charles couldn't get past al-Ghani's shield. After a while, al-Ghani tried to get away, but he was killed when his horse was shot out from under him by one of Charles's men. Without their leader, the Muslims broke and ran. The rest of the Muslim army saw their general fleeing and abandoned their posts as well. Charles's men pursued them, killing or capturing anyone who didn't escape. In the end, it's estimated that around 3,500 Muslims were killed, with only 1,500 surviving. On the Christian side, it's believed that somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 men died. Charles had won a decisive victory, but why should you care? Why is this battle important? Well, because the outcome of this battle changed the course of history. Had the Muslims won, it's possible that they would have kept pushing westward. The Christian armies wouldn't have been able to stop them, and eventually, all of Europe would have fallen to the Umayyad. We can only imagine how different the world would have been. If Spain and France spoke Arabic instead of Spanish and French, would European cuisine be better? Would Europeans look different? Would the Crusades have ever happened? Would Europe even be a Christian majority today? It's impossible to say. All we know for sure is that things would be very different. As it stands, though Europe would go on to conquer Iberia back from the Muslims over the next few centuries, by the year 1492, the last Muslim stronghold in the region would fall, and Spain would become a fully Christian kingdom once again. Eventually, though, the Spanish would try to conquer back the land they had lost in France. In the early 16th century, King Charles V of Spain invaded France with an army of 40,000 men. He was trying to force the French to accept his brother Ferdinand as the heir to the throne. When the French king, Francis I, rejected this demand, Charles invaded. Unfortunately for the Spanish, the French were able to defeat them at the Battle of Umayyad. So, what's the craziest thing you've learned from the series so far? Let me know in the comments below. Also, make sure to subscribe for more fun history. Thanks for watching.